So, NgRx plus GraphQL, take two.
Take two.
There are many things to improve with this take.
Many things to improve with this take. Yeah. First being the audio issues, and the second being the way that we frame it.
Yes.
We can be a lot more. We can have a lot more. What's the word? Diplomacy or like. Well,
nuance.
Yeah, nuance. Yeah. We're not at all saying. We just have like a disclaimer at the beginning of like, we're not at all saying anything negative about any client software for GraphQL. The purpose of this video is purely educational and to address a very specific misconception in the NgRx and Angular communities that GraphQL and NgRx are mutually exclusive. That's the bottom line here, is that there's a lot of confusion because some GraphQL client libraries manage state for you, that for people who are new to either NgRx or GraphQL or both, that can get conflated. The state management with the actual like data access can get confused and think that, oh, since I'm using NgRx, that means I can't use GraphQL. I think that's a really common problem for people who are, there's a lot of patterns going on. There's like, you're learning the Redux pattern and you're learning the difference between GraphQL and REST. And there's all these different libraries and frameworks and stuff. So it's easy to think of GraphQL as like a set of software when actually it's really just like a protocol for accessing data.
Right. And it's interesting. You mentioned, or you said the phrase data access. I was having a really good conversation after our last stream about this topic, and I think data access really encapsulates what GraphQL clients tend to do. They don't just fetch data for you. They don't just do state management. They also do that in-between code where they glue together the fetching of data with your state management.
Right. Yes.
So like,
that's
if you
a really
look at
good way of putting it. Yeah.
So there's a term for that. There's a data access object, or DAO, is
Yes.
A term that gets thrown around for that. And there are REST clients that do this. I think in the Angular community, people have heard of Breeze.js at one point.
Yes, we used to use Breeze at my last job, and then we ripped it out. But we did use it for a while because it did that. It was basically like kind of like a graph of your data, and you would use it for changing or reading or updating data, and it would keep track of this graph kind of thing for you, and then like reconcile the two.
Yep. NgRx actually has a DAO library called NgRx Data.
Yes.
Coincidentally, created by the same person who made Breeze.js.
Yes.
It connects your REST API to your NgRx state management solution and sort of does the same thing. Keeps track of all the data. It handles fetching the data for you. It handles putting the fetched data inside of the store. And it kind of encapsulates all of that functionality.
Yes.
So data access objects, these kinds of libraries are extremely powerful because they abstract away so much for you. But I think what Sam and I have seen is that because this pattern, this data access pattern, is so prevalent in GraphQL clients, a lot of developers, especially in the Angular community, mistake all the capabilities of these fully featured data access libraries as being what GraphQL is.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
So I think the goal of this video is not to say you should not use data access libraries. You should stay away from those GraphQL clients. It's more to show this is what GraphQL is. GraphQL is just a query language and a runtime to execute those queries. And then we're going to build up the pieces of a data access object sort of by hand or manually or from scratch.
Yeah, kind of
And
what we're trying to do is like define the boundaries between NgRx and GraphQL and the data access object layer, basically. Kind of make those edges a little bit more distinct by showing like a manual process.
I think I joked after our last stream that if you ever hear me say that this is the easier way to do it, eject me out into space, because it's not. This is
Right.
the by hand from scratch,
Yeah.
high barrier to entry kind of approach to it. So you should pick this approach, with a lot of trepidation, but there's a lot of power. Just like with any abstraction, when you get rid of an abstraction and do it by hand, you suddenly gain a lot of power in doing so. So just be aware there are trade-offs to that approach.
It's sort of like implementing. I mean, it's similar to like implementing Redux from scratch versus using NgRx or Redux. Like you can get the basic concepts. I also use the same analogy when I talk to people about rolling their own authentication from scratch. Like, sure, you can. It's an educational exercise. It's meant for learning and to get a better understanding of what is going on. But there's a lot of refinement that goes into these libraries regarding performance and like edge cases and stuff like that.
Developer ergonomics.
Yeah, developer ergonomics. There's like a ton of stuff that goes on behind the scenes in these libraries that, they take that manual implementation and have been working on it for, in some cases, years in order to get it to work. So, yeah, any of these sort of roll your own X episodes or videos are more educational exercises. We would never suggest using that like in the real world. But you will. What's a nice benefit of this though is then you get a better understanding of what to look for. Because when you're rolling your own, you can kind of be like, oh yeah, this part was really difficult, so I need a library that's gonna handle this for me. Like it might be the caching side of things or something like that. Yeah. So with that, I think that's a good preface. If you want to sort of dive in, we've got. What have we got? What's our starting point here? We've got our.
We're bare bones.
We're bare bones. Oh, I see. You have. Where's the server? Is the server not in here anymore? Oh, there it is.
Server's in there.
Server's in there still. Okay. So, what do we need to do first?
I think the first thing we need to do is build out a way to execute GraphQL queries.
Okay. So we already have NgRx already set up here. Do we already have like state and everything set up, or are we? What stage are we at in setting up NgRx?
Yeah, so we have the NgRx state libraries installed, specifically store effects and store DevTools. They're all imported in our root application module, but we don't have any effects registered. We don't have any reducers registered. We just sort of have those with empty config objects, and then we have the DevTools turned on to instrument the store. That way we can use the Redux DevTools to introspect state.
Okay.
There's no components in here. I mean, it's completely bare bones from a client perspective, but the server is a little bit more robust. So Sam, you want to talk to us about the habits GraphQL server you've written?
Yes, I can walk us through what's happening with that. So this is a really simple GraphQL server. It's using Apollo server, and it's all in memory. So I've got the type definitions and resolvers. And so in the schema here, we have kind of two basic data structures, which are habits that have descriptions and points, and then we have entries, and those entries have some notes, and they also have a completed property. And when that completed property is set to true, then it adds 10 points to the habits points, and then there's a total points. Oh, this one might not have this iteration doesn't have the total points calculation, but that's basically what happens. Every time you add a new entry and set it to completed, then it will update the points on the habit, and the habit gets listed out, and the entries are nested underneath. So pretty straightforward in the, let's see. What I've done here is in the models file is where all of the logic lies for all of the data models. And so all of the different functionality, this is all just JavaScript, and then I export it. And that way in the resolvers, I can import it and basically make it a mock database where you can just call db.getHabits, and it just sort of is like a very bare bones ORM kind of thing. This is actually another good example of like, yes, this I've essentially built my own ORM and fake database, but like you would never in a million years use that in a production application. This is purely for the sake of education. And so then, yeah, so all that's happening here is, let's see, do you have the server running?
I do.
So we can go over to the server and look at the GraphQL playground that's running on Apollo server here. And so this was actually with a more updated version, so I can get rid of that. If I just run the query of get habits, then you can see that I get a habit and an entry and another habit and another entry. And then we just have mutations around all of those things. Just your basic, it's basically CRUD just with GraphQL. And I find that that's a good way of teaching GraphQL because it's a helpful way of translating between the two. So that's what's happening. So our goal is to get NgRx to play nicely with this little server. Close that out.
Yeah, and so I think the right place to start here is going to be to put together a way for our client or our UI to actually issue GraphQL requests. Because we're not using any other library than NgRx and Angular. So like out of the box, without anything else in play, how can we actually issue a GraphQL request?
Yes. I think that sounds like a good place to start.
So let's jump into app component, and we're going to build this on top of HTTP client. So in the constructor here, I'm going to inject HTTP client from Angular, and we're going to use the HTTP client to issue our request.
Okay.
So a GraphQL request is structurally fairly simple. One of the things that I want to point out is that GraphQL is sort of what we call transport agnostic. It is designed in such a way that you could issue a GraphQL request over HTTP, over a WebSocket connection, using process-to-process communication, all sorts of ways. If you have a method of transmitting data to something and getting a response back, you could probably use GraphQL on top of that transport method.
Right. Yeah, I think that's another area that is confusing for beginners because it seems like it's hard to distinguish between the GraphQL like spec versus like all of the different implementations. So one question I get asked a lot is just like, is GraphQL, is it specific to JavaScript? And the answer is no. It's actually used all over the place, like in Go, .NET. I mean, like really, literally anything. It doesn't care what language you're using. It doesn't care what transport layer you're using.
Yep. So for this app, we're going to use HTTP as our transport layer. And to do that, what we have to do is we have to issue a post request to our GraphQL server. And in the body of that request, we need to give it a query, which is going to be our GraphQL query string, along with any variables that our query is declaring that it uses.
Yes.
So let me just kind of drop in a quick query here. So this is the same one that Sam was just showing. I'm going to get all the habits. I'm going to get their ID, description, their points, and all their associated entries. And
Perfect.
Once I've set up this request, I'm going to subscribe to this observable to actually get it to run. And I'm going to take the result. I'm just going to console log it out for now.
I wasn't following your... Let me click over here to Make sure I'm following you on. There we go. Okay.
All right. So I hit save. So now you should be able to open up the DevTools, and we should get some data back.
So refresh.
This is the part that's always so slow with VS Code Live.
Yeah, it really is. I want to just make sure I'm not throttling anything. Nope. Yeah, that's the one downside with VS Code Live. I saw it flash. I saw the data flash up. There it goes. Yeah, it just takes a second. All right. Yep. We got it. So, I mean, that's kind of crazy to me. Just like being able to pass a query and variables. And there you go. You know, I mean, it's essentially just like a, you know, you're kind of using REST in order to use GraphQL, so it's not super sophisticated, but that's all it is in the end of the day, because it's just using an HTTP transport layer.
Yep. And so this is really kind of the body of a extremely simple GraphQL client. We could probably refactor this request out into a GraphQL service that our application shares, just to sort of abstract away a couple of these pieces, you know, hide the HTTP client and the mechanics setting up the request.
Yeah.
But if you've got an HTTP client in any language, you can issue GraphQL requests using that HTTP client.
Yeah. So should we, where should we go next? Should we move this into a GraphQL service, or should we set up some of the NgRx stuff?
Let's go ahead and set up the GraphQL service.
Okay.
So I'm going to make a new file here in the app module called graphql.service.ts. And then I'm just going to do some copy and paste here. I'm going to set up an injectable service. I'm going to set the provided in option to root. And I'm going to borrow that constructor. So for the API of this, if someone wants to consume it, they probably want to provide us a query and then optionally some variables. So I'm going to add a method to the service called fetch that takes a query and an optional set of variables. And I'm going to return the same request we were making earlier. So I'm going to put the HTTP client as a member on this service. Cut and paste this guy here, and I'm going to return this .http.post. And instead of hard coding in the query and variables, I'm just going to provide in the one that the user passes to this method.
I'm just welcoming some of the new attendees. Welcome, Kapehe and Josh. All right. Yeah. So you named it fetch so that we could, because here's another thing that's a little bit confusing here, is that even though this is called query, it would accept both a query and a mutation.
That's right.
Yeah, so one of the things in the last time that we were debating about was like whether we would make an abstraction around this to where the user would actually call a query or mutation method. I think in this case we can skip it, but that's one thing that we noticed last time we were trying to do this.
Yeah, hopefully fetch is just a better general term for the fact that it can do both.
Yeah.
So now we can take this GraphQL service and we can go back to the app component, and we can, instead of injecting the HTTP client, we could instead inject our GraphQL service. And then we can take this query, and instead of using HTTP, we can use GraphQL.fetch and pass in that query.
Nice.
So hit save, should be able to go back to the app, and everything should still be working. We should still be getting our data.
Yeah, let's check it out. While we're waiting for it to load, people who are watching, how's it going? What's going on with you? And how many of you are using NgRx or Angular versus like straight up Redux in React or just something else? All right, so we've got our habits coming back. So cool, everything's still working great.
Yep.
All right. So now, I just want to look at that fetch function again. So this function is returning an observable, right? Because it's just an HTTP post. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's cool about that is that means that our little GraphQL client we just wrote has some interesting benefits. It works out of the box with HTTP interceptors. It is an observable, so it does all of the observable things you'd expect. You can pipe it into whatever you want. You can cancel it. And as we'll see here in a couple of minutes, you can use it with NgRx.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jacob says, using Angular, interested in how GraphQL works with Angular. Yeah, I agree. I think there's actually been a surprising lack of content of GraphQL plus Angular, and so I'm hoping that a lot of the work I'm doing on various Apollo-related things and GraphQL-related things, I can just double dip with both Angular and React and put out some content on that. Botnew says NgRx for the win. Awesome. I love NgRx, obviously. I'm a pretty huge fan of it. And then Jacob also says, never been a huge fan of NgRx, but I want to learn more. Ah, Jacob. No, I legitimately want to know, are you not a huge fan because is there something you don't like about it, or is it that you're not a fan and that you've never used it, so you don't really know what the use case is for it? Okay. All right, so now let's see.
So one of my favorite things that I like to do at this step is a little trick to force our IDE to give us syntax highlighting for our GraphQL queries.
Yes.
Just because it makes it look a little bit
blew
pretty.
my mind last time.
So if you look at app component, we've got this query, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign it to a variable up here called getHabits query. I'm going to pass in this getHabits query right on into fetch. And what I want is I want my IDE to syntax highlight this for me. Now, other GraphQL clients, they export a template tag, the GQL template tag. And they do some really interesting things with that tag. They kind of build a lot of that data access metadata by modifying your GraphQL query before it gets sent to the server. We're not going to do anything interesting with the query with our tag. We're just going to write sort of like a no-op GraphQL tag to get some syntax highlighting.
Yeah, this is another example of don't think our little roll your own GQL is even remotely as useful or sophisticated as the people who actually build the real deal. Jacob says it came across as complex, so I've never given it a chance. That's very fair. It is complex.
It is super complex. It's
complex in order to accomplish really complex things. So if you don't have a use case for it, then it doesn't really, you're not really missing out. If you find yourself in a really complex application and you don't know how to get all your state to line up and make things happen in different parts of the app, that's when you start taking a look at NgRx. Okay, so I'm gonna hide that so people can see a little bit better.
Yeah, so I've just written a no-op template tag that's going to take the string we tagged and just sort of return it. So it really doesn't do anything special, but what happens is I go back to app component and I use that tag in front of the string. Ta-da! Syntax highlighting.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Let me go back. I want to look. Oh, it did it without even. Don't we need to import it? We need to.
You might be behind a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Because I sure did import it.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to look. So, because this, I just want to back up a little bit because the tag template literal is kind of magical. So how did
Yes.
we? Is that because of template strings array that we?
Yeah, I'll walk through sort of what's going on here. So if you've never written your own tagged template function before, and I would not blame you because I think it's something you only really see or have to write if you're building a library. What it does is it provides this function, sort of all the pieces of the string split up at all the points where you try to insert a variable. And what it would let you do is you could build some really interesting things on top of it. Like if you've ever seen lit HTML, it's almost an entire UI framework built on top of this type of function. Like we mentioned, GraphQL clients use this to parse your GraphQL query and do some really interesting things with it. Ours doesn't do anything interesting. It just takes all those string pieces and sort of joins them back together again.
Right.
But the reason it does syntax highlighting is just because of the name.
Just because it's GQL. So is it the extensions in VS Code
Yes.
that are looking for it? So that's the trick.
That's
basically.
the trick.
Yeah.
GraphQL extensions are looking for any string tagged with that GQL function.
Yes.
And it syntax highlights it.
That's funny. So this is a hack.
This is a total hack.
Yeah, there's not any, like, the syntax highlighting is actually being done by the extensions, right? It's or is it VS Code or is it an actual extension?
It's the GraphQL extension will do it.
Yeah, I have.
So we'll GraphQL for VS Code.
I have the GraphQL VS Code one, and I have the Apollo one. So it seems like I think in either case, it's doing that. So yeah, just being clear, this isn't actually doing the syntax highlighting. It's just tricking the editor into doing it for us.
Like it's really powerful trick because not only does it syntax highlight, but if you have like one of those IDE plugins that can do like autocomplete or schema validation, like that all works with this trick.
Let's try. Oh, but you don't. Is it based on your extensions or mine?
I don't know. It's so weird.
So I think the GraphQL, we could actually. Yeah, it's so weird because you can actually if you're running Apollo server and you have the Apollo GraphQL extension, you can actually get syntax highlighting from the server by adding a little config, a little Apollo config, basically at the root of the project, where you can basically point it. I can maybe try it. I don't know if it'll
try it.
I don't know if it'll work with. I think it would be here
at the root.
Apollo.config.js. I think, and then whoops. I wanted to pull in. Why is it? That's really annoying. It's not copying and pasting. I'll have to write it by hand. It's module.exports equals and then client service. Actually, can I open this to the side? There we go. There we go. Yeah. Client service, and should be just localhost 4000. Okay. Save. And then, so let's try. You should be able to, if I do reload schema. Follow reload server. I think I don't think it's gonna work because I think you need to have the extension. But
let's see here.
We could try.
Go on.
Could see.
So it's called the Apollo extension.
It's a pretty cool trick. Yeah.
It's probably gonna make me reload when I install the extension, and it won't be worth it.
Oh yeah, that's true. That'll mess everything up. Oh wait, I put it in the wrong. it needs to be at the root of the client project. I put it in the wrong one. So let's see if that. Okay. Now if I run reload schema, no. Yeah. Oh well. If you were running service Apollo GraphQL, I'm pretty sure that's it. But yeah, I think the VS Code live share is screwing that up. But yeah, it's a good trick, because then it would give you syntax hide. It would give you like IntelliSense basically based on the schema in the server, which is pretty cool. Okay. So we've got the basic stuff. So should we, at this point, add like, get this stuff showing up on the page and add like an action and an effect or something? Or a reducer?
Yeah, let's start with the NgRx pieces of it.
Yeah. Let me follow you again, I think. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna create a very generic set of actions, app.actions.ts. And we're not gonna follow best or good action hygiene to the T here. We'll just kind of keep all the actions in here to keep the example simple.
All right.
So I'm going to import from NgRx store a little helper function called createAction. And then I'm going to export an action called the enter action. And I need to find a better name for this, because interaction just sounds like interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a tough phrase. It's when is enter when the page loads, or when the route is triggered?
Yeah, when the route's triggered. Maybe let's call it enter home page. That'll be a little bit better for now. So now I've got a little enter home page action. And what we'll do is we'll set up our app component to dispatch this action.
Okay.
So I'm going to go back to the app service, and I'm going to inject the store.
Hey, Chris.
And when this component's created.
Love me some cursive fonts, yeah. What cursive font, Chris? Where are you seeing cursive fonts? Oh, and Bhaskar said, looks like it's going to be a cool stream. Thank you, Bhaskar. Good to have you here. Oh, yeah. You're right. The export function is italicized. Yeah. This is dank mono on mine. Okay, continue.
Yeah, so in the app component, I've just in the constructor, I've dispatched the enter homepage action.
Okay.
And now that we've done that, I've hit save. You should go back to the app, open up the Redux dev tools, and we should see that action being dispatched.
Okay, let's do that. Redux. Yup. There it is. Awesome.
Cool.
Italicized. Exactly.
So let's key off of that action to write an effect that's going to call our GraphQL.fetch service for us.
Yeah.
And the idea here is that we want to isolate side effects from our application. That's one of the benefits of using NgRx, is that we really decouple any code that needs to talk to a server or talk to an asynchronous browser API, or you do some kind of like time calculations away from our components. And the benefit of doing that is that our components, after we've performed this type of refactor, will have a lot less business logic in them. That kind of improves their testability, and it really narrows down the focus of components to just passing down data or rendering to the screen.
Right. And in this case, what's cool about this is that then when you have all your logic in the effect, then like if you were swapping out between a REST API and a GraphQL API, all you'd have to do is change it in the effect, and the components don't know anything about where the data is coming from. They don't have to know the source of the data at all, because the effect is what's handling all of that. All right.
Okay. So I just have a little app effects class here, and I've created or initialized an effect called get habits. And so inside of here, what I need to do is I need to listen for the enter homepage action and then issue my GraphQL request.
As action app.actions. There we go.
So I'm going to inject the actions service. This is coming from NgRx effects, and this is an observable of every single action that gets dispatched anywhere in our application.
Right.
So it's like a super powered output for your entire app. Any component could push things into this output, and then any effect or any reducer can listen for those actions to either issue a request or update state.
Yes.
I'm going to use this stream to specifically listen for one action. And NgRx comes with a special operator that makes this a little bit easier called of type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in app_actions.enter homepage action here to of type. And now I've built an observable of homepage actions. So this observable will emit every time any place in the application this action gets dispatched. So in our app component, when it dispatches the enter homepage action, this observable that I've built up here in my effects class will fire.
Beautiful.
Giving me a really good opportunity to use it to issue a request. So I'm going to use exhaust map for this.
So why exhaust map there?
You tell me, Sam.
So exhaust map waits for the observable, the inner observable to complete before it basically lets anything else happen. So when you're doing something with an HTTP call, sometimes let's say that we have this associated with a button, and the user mashes that button to go get habits 1,000 times or something. What exhaust map will do is it will wait for the first call to complete. It'll basically ignore everything else and wait for the first thing to complete, and then it will continue listening. Whereas if we were to use this with concat map, it would basically build up a backlog of requests. So it would Alex just said exhaust map is a normal map that's been trapped in its home for the past 8 weeks. Yes, I completely agree. Exhaust map is what you use when you're building an RxJS application in quarantine. So concat map, on the other hand, if the user clicks that button 1,000 times and sends off 1,000 requests, even if the first request takes some time, it will still create this backlog or back pressure, as we say, to complete all of those remaining requests. So Mike and I are big fans of exhaust map for HTTP requests. It's not always the right answer, but it's kind of become my default, actually. What's an example, Mike, of when you would want to use concat map over exhaust map? Is there a practical example of that?
Yeah, so if you look at the mapping operators, amongst switch map, merge map, concat map, and exhaust map, 3 of the 4 of them have race conditions. So with merge map, you get this behavior where everything runs at the same time. My favorite analogy to use for this is the post office. Let's say Sam and I were going to the post office and we needed to get in line to get some packages delivered. Well, if we were using merge map in this situation, Sam and I would basically run up to the postmaster at the exact same time, and the postmaster would have to try and handle both of our requests in parallel. And there's no guarantee about which order our requests are going to be completed in.
Right.
Exhaust map is the real post office experience. If I went up first, Sam would sort of come to the post office, realize that the postmaster is busy, and just leave. Because he knows that I'm at the post office and this is going to take a really long time.
Yeah. See also DMV. Although everything now, I mean, who even knows? I mean, but yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
Switch map is the way I wish lines worked for me only, where I go into the post office, I see Sam is busy with the postmaster, and I just kind of push him out of the way, and I get to go next, and Sam's whole request has been completely canceled.
Yes.
But the way lines actually work is concat map. where if Sam gets in line first, then I get in line behind him and I have to wait for Sam to finish.
Yes.
Now, as Sam said, there's a chance here that with concat map, the line's going to get really, really long, and that can sometimes lead to maybe some delayed behavior in UIs, but it's also the safest, fairest way to handle requests. So if you're not sure which mapping operator to use, like concat map is the best one because there's no potential race conditions and it has really predictable behavior.
Yes. Jacob says, can you guys rewrite the RxJS docs? Great way of explaining. I'm going to drop a link here in the chat because we gave a talk at RxJS Live back when we were allowed to leave the house. We gave a talk at RxJS Live called, it's about the group by operator. But we spend the first, 10 minutes of that talk explaining the difference between concat map and exhaust map and switch map and what they do. And we have these beautiful animations to go along with it. You can also find all the slides there. I'm going to actually embed the talk right there. That would make a lot more sense now that I've switched over to Gatsby. Cool. Yeah. A little tangent, but sometimes I just think these little things end up being really useful to people because especially with RxJS. Okay, so now we've got, make sure I'm still following you. So now we've got our effect, and we need to, I'm getting a red squiggle here.
Yeah, so the problem is we're making a request, but we have not mapped it into another action.
Right.
So effects are really interesting in that they communicate with the app exclusively through actions. It's sort of actions in, actions out. And so what we want to do here is we want to map the result of finishing this request into a new action.
Yes.
Alex Mabry says, Mike Ryan Dev, sounds like you've lost your marbles. You've kind of got to lose your marbles a little bit if you're going to get really deep into how RxJS works. It's just inevitable.
It's true. Okay, so we're going to create a new action for basically the success of getting the habits.
Yep, and again, we're not following good action hygiene. This is not how you would write actions.
Why
in a real
not?
App.
Why wouldn't this be? What makes this bad action hygiene?
Yeah, so the big problem here is that we're mixing up our different action sources. So the way that we recommend you organize actions in an application is based on the emitter. So that typically means that if you're building a module, here we're kind of building a habits app, you group all of your actions that the user directly causes to occur into a user set of actions.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the ones that sort of represent our API responding to our app one way or the other, those are sort of our API actions, and we group those separately. And that organization and naming scheme gives you a lot of clarity when you look at the Redux DevTools. You can say, oh, I see where this action was dispatched from. I sort of understand who the actors are in my system from that action log.
Yeah, that makes
Here, we're
sense.
just putting all the actions in one big module, and we're not naming them super descriptively. But that makes it a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to navigate. So that's kind of the trade-off for us today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use an any here.
Yeah, I find when I'm teaching Angular or NgRx, I have to do a lot of cheating. Otherwise, there's so much overhead with the TypeScript. Like just the cognitive overhead of people being able to follow is pretty high.
And also the syntax can be a little confusing here, so let me explain what's going on.
Yeah, this part trips me up sometimes of understanding like when something is an object to destructure and when it is when it's a function.
Yeah. So basically, this is what we call like the payload function. And what this allows us to do is allows us to accept some data from the person that dispatched this action and add that data directly to the action object. So here, each of these parameters of this function are the data that this action creator accepts. And then the object that we return is going to be all of the data that will appear on that action after it's dispatched. So really we're saying, hey, when you create a get habit success action, provide me a list of habits, and then anyone who's listening for this action will be able to get that list of habits. let's check out how that's going to work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my app effects, and I'm going to pipe this fetch request. And I'm going to map the response into an app actions dot get habit success action. And I have to pass in here a set of habits, and that's going to be, I think, response dot data. I want to say.
Yeah, I can never remember how this gets carried across, and whether, like, some libraries I think unwrap that a little bit for you, but I think it won't get unwrapped here.
Okay, I think we just one dot data maybe. Looking at it.
Okay.
So now that we've done that, all we have to do to get this effect running is to go register this effects class. So to do that, I'm going to jump back to the app module, and here I'm using effects module.forRoot, and I'm going to add our new app effects class to this array.
Yes. Cool. So now we've got the data coming back to us, and we've sent it off somewhere with a payload. So now we actually need to put it in the store, right?
Yeah, it's actually data.habits. So
Yes.
actually, if we run the app now and we go inspect the Redux DevTools, we should see our two actions get dispatched.
Yeah, let's, yep, there's get habit success. And we should
And if you inspect the action tab, you should be able to see data on it.
Okay, habits. And yeah, we got it. Data.habits. Perfect.
So now that we've got this action being dispatched, we could write a little reducer to capture that response, stick it in the store so that our component can read it out of the store.
Yes.
So again, just in the same app folder, kind of getting a little messy with it, I'm going to create a habits.reducer.ts.
Okay.
And I'm going to show off just a little bit of some of the evolved thinking of how to write one of these state modules. So I've been working a lot recently with Deborah Karada on sort of trying to figure out what best practices for these should look like.
Yeah.
I think we're going to try and roll it up into an actual official NgRx style guide at some point, though don't hold me to that promise. So first I'm going to create an interface called habits shape. So the shape interface is going to describe the shape of the state that this module is going to consume. And this is just going to be a list of habits.
That's good, because there's a lot, as it is now, the word state gets used in a lot of different places, and it gets really hard to follow.
Yeah, there was a previous coworker of mine, Kyle Banks, I have to give credit to for that name. It really helps reduce the number of places you're using the word state at, and makes your autocomplete just that much more efficient or easier to use.
Yeah, exactly. Because trying to keep track of which is the state interface that's coming from NgRx versus which is the state interface of your reducer gets really tricky.
Yes. And then after the declaration of the shape of our state, that's where we're going to start putting our selectors. So we've defined the shape of it, and then the second place is selectors. If you've got some NgRx background behind you, you've probably done an opposite, where you've done the interface first, then the reducer, then the selectors. But that order has some gotchas. Namely, it doesn't let you use the selectors inside of your reducer. And it can be really handy sometimes to actually read something from state when you're processing an action. So having access to those selectors might help you build up some of that logic a little bit easier. So I'm going to write a little selector here called getHabits. It's going to take in our state that is matching this state shape, and it'll return our list of habits that we're holding on to. And then finally, we're going to create a reducer.
Yeah, this is flowing a lot more logically to me, because like when I am building out something to teach NgRx, this has always tripped me up. Is like logically to me, as a teacher, there's so much setup to get to the point where you're actually doing anything that I think this might help overcome some of that.
I hope so. So here I've got my initial state, and I'm just going to pass this in as the first argument to create reducer. And then now I can use the on function to set up listeners for specific actions. And in the callback of these listeners, I can use that to return a new copy of state. So at the top, I'm going to import star as app actions from app.actions. And I'm going to listen for that app actions.getHabit success action. Another tip that I'm going to recommend here is every time you use a callback function in on, put a specific type annotation here on that return. So the reason for that is without it, let me show you what will happen. If I don't have that on there, it would let me add whatever I want here without a TypeScript warning. Like there's no red squiggles, this app compiles fine. But if I get more specific about it, I'll start to get some errors if I've accidentally mistyped something in one of these return statements.
Yeah, that's really smart.
So I'm going to delete that because that's not actually part of our state. Instead, I want to update habits to be action.habits.
Yeah, and we talked about last time how you could destructure habits here, but a lot of times that becomes really hard to read, just because. So if I do habits here, I could actually just do this and just use destructuring for the whole thing. But that's okay for such a simple app. But as this would get longer, it becomes harder and harder to read. So we actually, both of us, I think, have kind of agreed that it's a lot more legible to, even though it's like less elegant, it's like more legible to just keep this as state and action and then just take what you want out of it.
Yeah, these reducers are already really what I'd call syntactically noisy.
Yeah.
A lot of syntax to write one of these. So avoid using extra syntax inside of these, basically. You've already made this really noisy and hard to read in Grok. So using as simple or as concise syntax as possible inside of these callback functions will go a long way to improving the readability of these functions.
Yeah. Okay, so I think all that's left is to get this showing up on the page, right?
Yeah, we need to get this registered. So I'm going to create an app state module here. And this is where I'm going to actually export our app state interface, where I'm going to put everything together. I'm going to also have our list of reducers and any of our sort of global selectors that are ready for components to use. So I'm going to import star as habits state here. And I'm going to say that on our root application state, there is a place for some habits state. And that is of type habits shape.
Okay.
For this reducers object, I'm going to use a little utility type from NgRx store called action reducer map. What this let me do is I can pass in app state right into it, and it'll let me know if I'm missing any reducers that need to be registered. So here it's letting me know that I've not registered the habits reducer.
Yes.
And then finally, this habits state module exports one selector to let me actually read the list of habits. And so I need to export that into a global selector. That way my components can actually consume it. And I'm going to start off by writing a selector that first gets the habit state. So given the app state, let me get state.habits. And then I can export select habits again. Except this time I'm going to use create selector to combine select habits state with the child implementation of this. So all this is doing is just saying, this is how I get the global, this is how I get the habit state out of the global store, and then create selector is sort of gluing these two pieces together. So you can kind of read this in order. First, I'm going to get the habit state, and then out of the habit state, I'm going to get the habits.
Yeah, that's great.
I have to register these things. So I'm going to jump back to app module for just a second. And in line 14, where I'm passing an empty object, what I really want to do is I want to pass in my list of reducers here. So that actually gets my reducers registered and wired up. And now we're ready to read this data out of the store and maybe start doing something interesting with it.
Yes. So we can hop back over to the app component, right? And
Yeah, I'm actually going to import the common module real quick while I'm here and thinking about it.
What do we need from the common module?
Probably the async pipe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So then we'll hit the app module. We can get rid of that habits. Well, actually, no, we do need... Wait, no.
Yeah, we don't need that query. We don't need the GraphQL service. We don't
Yeah.
need the HTTP client.
Yeah, we don't need
Just
any of
need
that. We just need the store. Yeah, in our effect is where we're storing our different query. We could actually have a separate file if we wanted to of queries and mutations, and then import them into the effects file, and then we could do it that way. That's probably what I would do. Is I would export them all from a single file or something, or single file per feature or something like that, and then I would import them into the effects. Okay, so we're just calling the selector. Now, what's the difference between doing store.select versus piping in the selector? Yeah.
Yeah. So select is an operator. And so you can import the select operator and then do store.pipe and pass in select.
Yeah.
But the thing is, what we've noticed is really you only ever apply that one operator to the store, and you tend to not apply any other operators, and you tend to not apply you don't tend to apply select more than once.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And so to enforce sort of some of those good behaviors, I always recommend doing store.select instead of store.pipe select. This just helps you from doing something too crazy with the store observable. You should only ever really just be selecting data out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. The box man says this is so cool, so I'm really glad to hear that. And in case you're wondering, we will make all of this code and this recording will be up. I'll create a page on my site for it and everything with the YouTube embedded and the link to the sample code and all of that good stuff. So don't worry there.
Okay, so what else I've done here is I've declared an observable property on app component of our habits, and I'm going to use our selector from the app state to read those habits out of the store and set up that observable. And then in the template, just for now, I have used the async pipe along with the JSON pipe. And what this will do is this will first subscribe to our habits out of the store using the async pipe. And then it's just going to spit it out in some nicely formatted JSON. That way we can just make sure that all the data is wired up correctly before we start trying to bind it to any components.
Yeah.
So this little pipe, the JSON pipe, you might not have ever seen it in Angular's common module, but it's a super handy little like debug utility to make sure the data is flowing correctly.
Yeah, that is a super handy tip. We've got a lot of hot tips in this episode here. Picking up a lot of good things. Yeah, so now if I go back over to the browser, you can see we've got our habits and our entries displaying as JSON there. And you can also see that we've got still the enter homepage action and the get habit success. And we can even do the old rewind.
Ooh.
And actually step through and see what's happening there. So you can see that when we enter the homepage, we have an empty array, and then when we get the habits and get that habit success, then it's a little right now it's a little delayed because of the Visual Studio Code live share, but you can see the steps through then when it's done, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, this basically is the core set of skills then that you would need to build up any other build up the UI, build out any habits and queries and mutations to do your different read and write functions and things like that. The things that this little implementation doesn't take into account, well, actually, so before, I guess we've got about 10 more minutes left with you. So
Yeah.
I think one question people might have is, what about, how would you handle, how much of caching is handled by NgRx versus what you would need to implement yourself? So that, for example, the list of habits or something, like one thing you can do with GraphQL is you can set up like polling and things like that, like and you can keep track of cache and that kind of thing. But I know NgRx has some stuff like that built in, or has libraries like NgRx entity and things like that. Where would you kind of go next for that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that'd be a really good topic to explore sort of in our next segment. But from a high level, we can kind of explore that a little bit.
Yeah.
As we said at the beginning, we do not have all the luxuries of like a really nice GraphQL client at our disposal.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to be building those features up sort of from scratch on top of NgRx over the course of these videos.
Yeah.
So let's take polling, for example, because I think it's a really great start. If we wanted to maybe say every 5 seconds reach back out to our server and get that data again, we could write another effect for that. So let's do that now. So we can say poll for habits. We can start with create effect again. And what I really love about this example is it shows something that I don't think a lot of developers who are first learning NgRx quite connect with, which is that create effect can take any observable. Effects do not need to start with the actions service. They could start with any observable at all. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the interval observable. And this is just from RxJS. And what I can do is I can give it a period. So I'm going to say every 2.5 seconds, let's reach out. We'll use exhaust map again here. I think that's appropriate.
Well, I've never seen
sort of make the same
having
request.
an underscore in your milliseconds. Is that a thing?
Yeah, so you can use underscores as numerical separators just wherever you want. So I always do that to split up the second position.
Wow,
from
so
the
it just
millisecond
ignores
position.
the underscore.
Yep,
It just
some syntactic sugar.
Wow, that's another tip for the day.
So I wrote this effect, I've hit save, and now if we go back to the app and sort of watch, we'll see every 2.5 seconds it's going to get those habits successfully again.
Cool. So what I'm going to do, once it loads for the first time, actually, let me look at that again. So pipe, dispatch, get habit, I see. Yeah, so with RxJS, that makes it actually like pretty simple. So what I'm going to do is come over here to create habit mutation, and I'm going to do watch 20 videos a day and do that, create that, and then go back over to my thing, and you can see it already got it. The app didn't actually reload. I can prove it by, we're not reloading the app. And I'm going to do, let's see, call friends every day. Oops. Head back over. Boom. There it is. Polling. That's pretty cool. All right, that is one thing with the cognitive overhead of RxJS and NgRx. Once you kind of have that under control to some extent, like you can do some crazy, I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing to accomplish with basically a couple of operators in RxJS. Not having to set up any sort of additional tech or add any other additional libraries just to be able to pull a server like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So you can really build out, like we don't have any abstraction helping us here. We're what I would say sort of bare metal with this implementation. But that's going to give us really fine-grained control over how we choose to cache our data, how we choose to invalidate that cache, how we do polling. And so those are going to be really fun topics to explore as we sort of build out our own custom GraphQL app.
Yeah, I think that sounds awesome. Also, the song that just came on is by a band called Abstraction, which seems appropriate. And the song is called Danger Noodle, which I don't know. I don't know what a danger noodle is, but Danger Noodle by Abstraction. That's pretty funny. Yeah, well, this seems like really good timing since you have to leave in a few minutes. So I think we made it to a really good stopping point. Will you?
Yeah, I'm about to jump on another live stream in about 45 minutes.
We should advertise that, shouldn't we? It's Modern Web
podcast?
State of NgRx. Let's see what their SEO is like. Modern Web podcast? What is it called?
I think it's called the Modern Web Podcast.
Let's see. Oh, maybe it's, I think it's actually this. I think it's the Global Angular Meet. Wow, angularmeetup.com. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so in 45 minutes or something, Mike will be on with Brandon and Wes and Alex to talk about NgRx, the state of NgRx. So highly recommend you go check that out. We did have one question. Botnu asked, for chaining effects, do you recommend building a large effect with a merge operator or tiny effects? I'll give you my answer. Yeah, I was going to say tiny effects. You want to compose together effects. And Mike has secretly coined the term good effect hygiene, which is and one of those tenets would be to let your one effect should handle one action and do as little as possible, so that way you can compose them together in case you need to have functionality that is duplicated in different places. Hope that helps. Okay, great. Will you push up this code, Mike? And I'll create a page and export this to YouTube and clean it up and all that good stuff.
That sounds great.
Awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you all for coming. I will figure out where to send you all. There's probably some other friend streaming somewhere, so I'll pull that up. But yeah, thank you, Mike, for hanging out. I definitely think we should keep doing this because I think this is pretty interesting to watch. Not because of me, mostly because of you. But I think it's actually like pretty interesting for people.
Yeah, it'd be fun to explore this. I think we could really build out a pretty complete example.
Yeah, I think
over
so
a couple
too.
of streams.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's about it. I don't actually have. It doesn't actually look like any of my normal people are online right now, so I might just call it. But yeah, thanks everybody, and we will talk to you soon.
See y'all.